Namaste and in Lak'ech, and welcome to this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and this week's guest is Lynn Coleman. She is an author, a copyright expert. She has her own podcast that she talks about how we integrate, understand, and use power. So that would be a definite go-to place for you. And she's got all kinds of other ideas and notions and things that really bring some good salient points to life. So we're going to get into that in just a minute. We'll be right back. Lynn, great to have you here. I've been looking forward to this conversation. We've had one previously for your podcast, but now we're going to flip things around and I'm going to ask you some very interesting questions. Glad to have you here. Thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Zan, and I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of challenging questions you've got for me, because I know there's going to be moments where I think, "Oh, what do I think about that?" So bring it on.
Oh, good, good. Well, we start, the notion of the show is to expose these inner and outer challenges that we have. We're bereft of this bridge for the most part because we have an inner and an outer life. We live half inside and half outside. We don't talk about what's going on inside, which really creates a lot of problems in the world in our own ability to communicate with each other and more often understand, more importantly, understand each other. So in these processes, the recognition of interconnectivity sometimes happens earlier in life and as a child, and we don't recognize it until we're older and can look back and see just how connected things were. Sometimes it happens in our teens, sometimes it doesn't happen till midlife, if it ever does. So I'm curious, Lynn, when did that, because I know you've got an interconnection, when did you first begin to recognize it?
I think I first recognized there was something, like an inner life going on, lying in bed at night as a child, and I would ask myself questions. I would wonder about life because I was an observer and a listener, and I would see adults saying things and doing things, and I think that's not right. Why are they doing that? Why are they saying that? And at night I would lie in bed and think about it and ask myself questions. So I think it really it was there then. I don't think I would have realized that. I wouldn't have called it an inner voice. Probably no, that was probably be in my 20s before I even recognized, hey, hang on a minute. There's this thing going on inside my head, as well as something going on outside. And oh wow, actually they have what's going on inside has a massive effect on what's going on outside. I don't think I was that aware of the fact that it was going on at the same time for much longer than that. So
Well, it takes maturity, right? It takes
yeah.
years of learning how to observe and reflect and be curious. And the, the curiosity is what begins it, that conversation you have with self, right? You, Irvin Laszlo would say, well, that's your higher self that you're speaking with and that has the answers to everything. I find through my own experience as a teen that I became aware that we're all cosmic consciousness condensed into form, just unaware. The Vedas, a 15,000-year-old document, a series of poems, basically say we're all divine threads connected to source, capable of God consciousness. Well, what that tends to mean is that for every question that we have, there's a source within us that gives us the answer. And I even think this is what Jesus meant when, he said, go into your closet and pray and the direct connect. He never said, hey, I'm an intercessor. And he said, no, you got a direct connect. Well, we got confused on that, I think. So how did you find this connection that you had as you grew into your teens and began to become aware that this was actually an important thing in your life and it makes a difference in how your life flows?
I think I was always reflecting and observing and wondering and I didn't discuss what was going on the inside very much.
Oh yeah, yeah. I hear you because we're deemed, and this is the thing, we're deemed as weird, crazy, insane. People they don't want to go there, usually because they've never done it themselves, and to even talk about it's a bit spooky. So the first thing they do is point fingers and create labels.
Yeah, I think that would have been the case for my mum. She's very much of the earth.
Hmm.
And but I think with my dad, I probably could have had those conversations. Because he was very curious and had some, for that time, quite interesting ideas. So I probably could have talked to him about those kind of things, but there was a block on speaking out. Where, I was brought up in the UK. It's quite a strict environment. Kids are expected to obey, or at least back then, or at least be very, very polite. So
Right. Well,
I
in
love.
America, we have the phrase, seen but not heard.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And we've got that as well. It was never actually used on me, but it's coming from that kind of idea that kids are supposed to be quiet. So I don't think I had that much of a sense that anybody was going to be listening to this stuff that was
Hmm.
going on inside
Well,
my
where
head.
do we get this notion that kids ought to be quiet? They're kids.
I
They're
know.
designed not to be quiet.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to put a battery in them to get noise, do you? I mean, they did.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
This is
yeah.
kind of
I don't
confusing
know.
because we don't nurture that and we
Yeah.
stifle it. We have for decades, if not millennia. And now look at the shape the world is in as a result. We don't know how to communicate with each other. Everybody's angry, frustrated, afraid, wanting to go to war, to fight, projecting. What happened to loving and being loved?
I think I think with kids, because I've got two.
Hmm.
One just shares naturally. She almost can't not share. And then my son was very closed off as a child, and I had to put in a lot of effort to get him to talk. He
Hmm.
didn't want to talk. There was obviously something going on inside, but he wouldn't talk. And I would have to, it would build up and up and up and up. And then he'd explode in sort of rage and then cry for hours afterwards. And
Well,
then
this is
everybody
kind of
would,
consistent with the trauma stuff too, right?
yeah,
Where it
absolutely.
comes up, it spills out, and hopefully
Yeah.
it's resolved. How did you know, how did you find a way through that with him? And I may have interrupted you as you were
No,
attempting
no,
to
it's okay.
explain it.
Um, I I always assumed that it would be better for him and for us if he talked. So I would talk about how much better he would feel if he spoke about what was going on.
Hmm.
But I was also very careful not to put any pressure on him so that he could do it when he was good and ready. Um, I
Now,
mean,
what do you feel about the depth of that trauma and maybe even the timeline for it? Because it's been said that we carry trauma from past lives, that there's already proof that, we have many lives, and that I think, even on a very cursory scientific factual level, there's enough proof that we can assume that that's correct now. Where does this trauma come from? How deep does it go? What life experience produced it to begin with? And based on that, how deeply embedded and how really traumatized is this child of God or a child of creation that's trying to find their way back into that state of loving and being loved.
Yeah, well, with my son, I knew there was a direct cause of it because it was a split with his father, and it was a very traumatic time. So
Hmm.
he taken a lot and turned it inwards. And so I would talk to him about as a child that I didn't speak about what was going on, and then sometimes I'd feel very lonely. And when I did speak, then I would feel better about it. And slowly he started
But you
to
always wonder, did I say the right thing? Right. Okay. Yeah, we're so
yeah, yeah.
codependent.
And he the other thing I would do is sometimes he would be really angry and really frustrated, and I would just say I love you, and and hold that love in my heart while he was, I mean, he was really struggling with this situation, and I just say I love you. And um and then sometimes he'd be really angry, and I'd look at him and I'd smile and say, I love you. And I remember one time he was really worked up, and he said, stop being nice to me. I'm trying to be angry. Because he would just break out of that anger, and then it would all be okay again. But he now
You
he
gave him that frame of reference, that different place from which he spoke, because when he said, that was really a reflection of observing himself in that moment, which is critical for self-awareness development.
Absolutely. And he's a great communicator now. He can talk about his emotions. He's really at home with that now. And I'm so proud to see how he communicates now. 22 years old, and he's doing brilliantly.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, guys, in general, right? We're supposed to be stalwart,
Hmm.
non-emotional.
Yeah.
This is the whole uh, backward motivations that we've gotten from the programming of previous generations.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is, especially today? And what do you think is a prudent path for men to embark upon to find that other half of themselves, their own feminine energy that they carry? Because we carry both. I don't care whether you're masculine or whether you're male or female. There's both of those energies that we have to figure out how to balance within us. How do you
Yeah.
see that happening with guys today?
Well, what I see is a lot of guys struggling with their who they are and what their value is in the world, and feeling devalued is what I see. Once upon a time, as a man, you had a certain status. You were, you were a provider, or you weren't. You had a certain role, and that's what you had to do.
Right.
Um, Women did the emotions, men did the go out to work and hunt and do all of that stuff, and coping with that was probably easier if you were showing your emotions less. So we've got sort of stuck in roles, and I think we're both trying to relearn how to do these things. But for guys, I think
Or
they're
unlearn the old
yeah,
ways, right?
exactly. And for guys, what I think perhaps the biggest challenge is not, letting go of the need to be in control, and
Mm.
be in control of, I mean, emotions are not predictable. They come and they go. Any guy who's been around, especially a woman who's going through something hormonally, you know, emotions are not predictable. They
Oh,
come, they go, and they're like clouds. And some of them are storm clouds, and some of them are,
well, we
wispy.
joke about, older guys joke about having gone through those
Yeah.
things with wives or girlfriends or several, and it is it's a really challenging period, no pun intended, for you as women to go through that because you don't know what's good. You're physicality is changing and the chemistry changes. You don't know who you are from one day to the next. So let alone your partner
From
who's
one day, from
standing
one
by
day.
going, okay, who am I going to wake up with today? Right? And how consistent will it be throughout the day? Because there's
Yeah.
all this fluctuation. Now,
Yeah.
learning how to be patient, loving, kind, compassionate with that also teaches a man a lot about himself and being able to deal with not being in control. And maybe that's part of the purpose of that, because, at that point in life, we've gone through the parentage, we raised kids, they're gone, we're grandparents usually by that point. So maybe this natural process of coming back together and actually learning how to be a couple again without the responsibilities of family, it offers a new venture, if you will, into the rest of life.
Yeah.
But provided you're still together at that point.
Yeah, well, I don't have that experience, but yeah, it would be lovely to be able to do that. And personally speaking, I would love to be able to do that. Yeah. Yeah.
How do we as guys, since we're on this, and this might be a little bit of a tangent, but how do we, how are we able to further understand and be more present with this process of finding our emotions, being able to express them, and being able to recognize the triggers, allow them to be pulled, yet not allow them to control in distracting or destructive ways. Because we're going to have them, we need to learn how to embrace it and deal with it without causing harm.
Yeah.
It's like
But
Google, do no harm, right?
what you're describing is, as you're framing it as a male process, but I think it's really a human process, as it's not as if women do no harm. I mean,
Oh, I'm sure, especially when you're in those moods that, there's there's things that come out that are very uncomfortable to hear.
yeah. Yeah, and anyway,
Truth or not, right?
it's not like all women are nice or nurturing or loving, or we're not as a gender universally nice people, just because we're female. So um I think the process is about it's it's about reflection. Reflection is a really important part of it, and that can be through talking. It can be through, when I work with my clients, we do a lot of journaling.
Mhm.
All kinds of things come out through journaling. It can be through meditation. Try things like visualizations, even sitting still and closing your eyes and listening to music and just noticing, or just trying to notice what's going on in your life, at various moments. So you don't have to understand it straight away. It's not,
Mhm.
a lot of the time we don't understand, or at least, I mean, there are people who understand these things very quickly, but a lot of the time it just takes a little bit of time. Just notice, and then maybe you write something down or talk to somebody about it, and then
But we're so emotionally attached to the outcomes. How do you step back far enough to observe it in a reflectionary way, as you're talking about, and not get caught up in all the emotions about it that we may have, right? Because the emotions, getting carried away in those, that seems to be where we lose focus and balance, where we get off in those distractions and we don't realize that, okay, this is a process. That's all it is.
yeah, and we're in one giant process of being human beings. That's life,
Mhm.
is a process. I guess we only get to that reflective place when we realize not being in the reflective place doesn't actually get us anywhere. maybe we need to spend enough time in that shooting from the hip place before we realize, hang on a minute, and perhaps there's a better way of doing this. Maybe we need to repeat. You know that story about walking down a road and falling into a hole and then walking down the same road again, falling into the same hole? Maybe you've got to get to the point where you think, oh, hang on a minute, I'm about to fall into that same darn hole again. Perhaps I need to do things differently.
Right.
So I think there's a process of repetition before you get to the point where you think, maybe there is another way to do it.
Yeah, I heard about, not to be generation specific, but I will be for a moment. In the early aughts, I was part of a Diversity and Leadership Alliance, and we had a breakfast at one of the major hotels downtown. There was a presentation along with that about the generations and multi-generation, because we're in a multi-generation workforce, right? How do we get along? And the presenter was talking about the different aspects and kind of the notable signs of the different generations. And we got to millennials, and he said, yeah, these guys are wonderful. They will try their hardest. They will bloody their head beating it against the wall until they finally give up and turn and ask questions.
Mm.
So when is your head bloody enough that you're going to turn and ask questions? And I think that's not necessarily specific to millennials, although they probably have more proclivity towards that as a generation. How do we learn to ask questions prior to the wall?
Ooh. Do you mean after the wall or before the wall?
No, I mean before we even get to the wall, because here's the wall, right? It's a it's a painful place.
Yeah,
How, and we
absolutely.
want to avoid pain. We do a lot of really aberrant things to do that. How can we treat it with kindness and consideration and
Mm.
then have the right questions so where that wall becomes malleable or even disappears?
I think we need to we need to be asking ourselves questions, checking in with ourselves really regularly. Um, and this it depends whether you're pre-wall or post-wall. Sounds like it's, yeah, it's questions like, am I happy? Am I doing what I really want to do? Am I being the person I really could be?
Mhm.
Am I, am I being generous? Do I feel generous? Do I feel kind? Or am I coming from a place of, when my heart's all scrunched up and, angry at people? I think noticing those kinds of things and being prepared to believe that you don't have to be angry all the time. You don't have to be bitter. You don't have to be resentful. You don't have to be fearful. All of those things are human experiences, and
Mhm.
we all experience all of them. And it's not like you learn how to deal with your emotions so you never have a bad day ever again. I mean, if only, but
That's kind of ridiculous, right? That's like
yeah,
it'd be wonderful and it may be possible. We don't want to discount that.
yeah, yeah.
However, as we've seen recently, with the different this last 4-year period, right? We started with obsessions on self-hygiene and sequestration, which gave us the opportunity to have some self-examination. And some that was effective for others, it didn't seem like it affected whatsoever because they're still trying to go back and have this dominance and control and command and control kind of structure and leadership still in organizations, which isn't working any longer,
Mhm.
and we're seeing the effects of that. Then you got the other side of it with this world changing activity of the leadership and what's possible, what's not possible, what might have been possible, and all of those things that are happening. And you made a comment of some events that were happening in Amsterdam of, how inept the handling of situations are because of the long-held bias toward certain things that,
Absolutely.
that hasn't been addressed
The
in the way that you're
unexamined bi
talking about.
the unexamined biases that are just, the platitudes that are used to explain anything that happens unthinkingly. This is just the way it is. There seem to be so many narratives. Oh yeah, this is this narrative. Let's stick that on it. We know what that is. So we'll just label it, and that's what it is. And I can't help feeling, surely we can get past that. Surely we are able to hold one thing and another thing at the same time. It doesn't need to be, this is the only truth.
Hmm.
I have the only truth, and everybody else has to agree with me. But I mean, surely I can see somebody else's side at the same time and weigh them up. And
Absolutely. And here's the opportunity to step back, reflect on, okay, here's kind of what's going on from a much more distant
Mhm.
place so that it's not as charged energetically.
Yeah.
We, as you mentioned before, men, women, governments, organizations, companies want to control. Well, there is no control, and we're finding that out, with the energy and quantum sciences and things. The only control that we have is on ourselves and how we respond to things, how we think, feel, and behave.
Hmm.
Now, how do you see that coming to light more so that we can have a bit more, not just self-examination, but community examination of, okay, what really works for us? How do we all navigate together and create perhaps even a more harmonious relationship so that we can share a planet together without fear of each other?
I've been having a discussion about that with with a group this week, because I allowed myself to be thrown off center by what was happening in Amsterdam.
Mhm.
Um, and so we were talking about this and how do you respond? How do you make sure you're not silenced? Because in this narrative, one group was being silenced and put down, and they weren't allowed to have an opinion. And so, how do you do that? And what we realized was you can do what you can do on a small level. Talk to people. If you talk to one person and you help change their mind, they might go home and talk to their child, and that might help change their mind. And so there's the ripple effect that we can make
Mhm.
use of. And there was another beautiful example because one of the people in the group was in Turkey, and she'd been telling her family about another person in the group who's in Iceland and what she was doing in Iceland. And so then we're cutting through national boundaries and national borders and really making international connections. So something that happens, something that somebody decides to do in Iceland is being seen and recognized by a family who have, have no direct, no direct connection with what's going on, but
Mhm.
they're still hearing about it. And that's changing their mind, just one little thing at a time. I thought that was really beautiful. So those were a couple of things that came out of our discussion. um
Now, in those, do you practice nonviolent communication, which may or may not be familiar to the audience? It's a way, it's how to speak and the words and types of language framing to use that's non-threatening, that's inclusive.
Absolutely, that's what that group is all about. It's about speaking, it's about listening, it's about affirming, it's about witnessing. And there is well, nobody in that group is going to start saying you this and you that. It's
Hmm.
not you communication, it's I communication. Um, and it's also questioning, asking questions. How can I do this? Or I've noticed this, and beautiful, magical feedback that comes out of it.
Sure.
It's special.
Now, with that, they're there with the intention and purpose of growing themselves. Now,
Yes.
those are great because you're not going to have the problems. And when you do, or if they surface to some degree, there's a collective embracing of that process and a nurturing through it because the group's there for that purpose. What about in normal life with others? Because we can practice things, we can be nurtured, we can feel whole in those places. What about stepping outside of that and dealing with the general public in your work lives and your relationships and things like that? How do you find things are working toward the, I'll just say, spilling out of those activities into the general public? And how can we better engage those that we see are obviously having challenges? Not understanding what their lives are, but yet
Yeah.
having, because you can see, we're all able to see people. We just, choose to ignore them most of the time. How, when you see someone that's in distress, what do you do? Do you just ignore them and offer I hope their lives are better, or do you just completely walk away, forget about it, or do you actually have the compassion to say, looks like you're having some challenges. Can I help? Or is there anything, whether, and these are conversations that happen in stores,
Yeah.
right? When you're
Yeah.
grocery stores, especially, you see people. Um, do you think that's effective? Do you think it is
Those things are absolutely effective. Um, I remember when I first came to the place I live now, I was in a women's shelter. Um, um, Very traumatized, in a complete state. Couldn't think straight, very fearful, excessively fearful. I didn't sleep through the night for a year. I was very, very fearful.
mm,
Um, and I remember going out one day with my kids, and a woman smiled at me. And that one smile made me think, and she was very unthreatening looking. So,
mhm.
there was no way, even while I was in that complete state of seeing threat everywhere, I was not going to see her as a threat. And that just made me think, oh, it's okay. There are good people here too. Because, I'd had to move house, and I was in a completely different area. I didn't know anybody. But just one little smile, it made such a difference. So even that's something that I try and do. If I'm in that local supermarket, we have quite a lot of refugees. If I can catch their eye and just smile at them, even at that kind of level, I try and do that. And it's tiny, but I know what it meant for me
It's
seeing a
like
friend.
dominoes, right? They build and are layers that, just a little here and there changes even in that moment. And right, it's a subtle, maybe short-term effect. However, it can build.
Yeah,
And when we can build that together as a community and begin to be thinking about these things, because we haven't been, right? We're all, humans are pretty selfish and self-centered, right? As long as our immediate sphere is fine, we generally don't want to get involved with anything else. Well, that's changing because we are not islands unto ourselves anymore. We're part of a whole. So how do
yeah.
we integrate with that whole? How do we behave in it? How do we nurture it into a place where we have some joy and happiness in it.
Yeah, I think we've sort of over the last couple of years, and it's been a number of things. It's not just been, it wasn't just the pandemic. It's also phones. You know, if you just watch a movie of 25 years ago, 30 years ago, people would naturally have conversations with one another. We just would, because we didn't have this constant sort of entertainment in front of our nose. And so we would naturally make more connections in a much more easy way. And we seem to be losing that ability to do that.
It seems that way, and yet the paradox is now that we have these devices, the world is available where our neighborhood was the only thing that was available prior to.
Yeah. And we would make the best of that because that was what there was. And now we have contacts in various places. So, I'm talking about the group, somebody from Turkey, somebody from
Right.
Iceland. We're talking to each other today. I'm in the Netherlands.
And the technology that's come about to allow this to happen, like this conversation we're having.
Absolutely. But it's changing the way that we look at people. I think it's becoming a little bit more transactional in the way that we look at people around us. Well, if you're not very interesting, I'll just go and look on my phone and, I'll find some kind of TikTok or something and that'll cheer me up. And so there is a sort of fundamental change happening in the way we're communicating.
Do we realize that we're finding more ways of setting our own boundaries of what we allow and don't allow into our lives? Not necessarily doing it consciously, but just with how we generally sense and feel about things.
Yeah, I mean, if I look at my kids, they are definitely watching certain things, not looking at other things. They're very conscious about those kinds of things. And I know a lot of people who do, okay, no social media, not doing this, not doing that. And so, yeah, there are more conscious decisions taking place, I think.
And it does seem like the newer generations are they're designed to be, have the more fast paced. You can see them flipping through the phones and looking at all the shorts, right? And then it looks like they're just thumbing through stuff until they see something that, oh, right, well, what is it that gives them that, oh, to stop and look? And
Yeah.
yet they're doing this, and we see it. I know I'm from generations way ahead of them. And I'm just fascinated at how quick they are. I do my best not to have bias because this is a new world or new way things are being introduced. And so I don't want my bias and prejudice to my own preference to get in the way. I want to acknowledge and be aware of, possibly even utilize their method of investigating life, if you will, and curiosity to help them grow in that larger perspective and get out of the so fast paced that you miss important details along the way. How do
Yeah.
how do you feel that is? Do you see that? And how do you navigate with your kids and others that you come in contact with in those kind of conversations?
Well, I still feel like if we're having a dinner together, then no phones. I
Hmm.
really like no phones because I want conversation, but that seems to be happening naturally now, which is great. It wasn't when they were teenagers, but hey, you can't fight a teenage brain. Um, what's interesting is that how aware they are of certain things that I'm not as aware of. So I'm learning from them they're telling me about this, that, or the other. My daughter recently said, we went to Rome for a week. I took my kids to Rome for my 60th birthday, and I asked them to do some research, find some things that would be good to do while we're in Rome. So I didn't have to do all the work, and
Hmm.
it's a more inclusive holiday. And my daughter came up with all kinds of suggestions. Oh, we can go to that restaurant. We can go to that restaurant, and the various things she came up with. And she said, and I said, where did you find all these things? She said, oh, TikTok. And she said, Mom, for my age group, TikTok is Google. And I thought, oh, wow, that is that's really profound.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling, isn't it?
Yeah. And she found some great places. She really did. So that
And she
is
participated. She felt like she was
absolutely.
part of what was happening rather than being drug along by it.
Yeah. Yeah, which I would much rather have. Yeah, so that's how we do that. You think of something for that day, you think of something for that day, and let's co-create something.
Sure.
Um, and they find news, they find all kinds of things that I know nothing about, and we're constantly sending each other weird and wonderful memes. So
My
yeah.
wife and her sons do that too. And it's funny, speaking of her sons, the younger one, when Chat GPT first came out, he's an explorer. He's in the Navy now, wants to be in the computer science, and he's always been involved with technology and curious and new stuff. Well, he shared it with me to begin with, and I, initially was like, wow, that's kind of mind-boggling. I don't know if I want to get involved or not.
Hmm.
And I'm kind of an early adopter with most things, but man, that just sounded like too much. Year later, I finally started exploring, and now it's like, wow, why did I wait? Right? However, the early form was a bit clunky and it didn't have full access to the web. It notes and still does say we're not perfect, but we got access. So you got to make sure that you vet the information that we give you,
Yeah.
which we don't. And especially in the modern media days, like that we were speaking earlier about a gentleman that kind of blew me off because he was so entrenched in the propaganda that had been put out during this campaign stuff that was nothing but lies. And the only reason I know they are is because I'd done the research many years ago to find out more about the person that they were trying to attack
Hmm.
and the disparity. And it's like, why do we have to tell lies and sling mud? Why can't we just acknowledge the other person and say, okay, they're doing this and I think this is better. What do you think?
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Right? And instead there's this, the construction industry was like that for a long time. It was one of the most adversarial environments there was until they decided, oh, gosh, maybe partnering would be a good idea. Partnering essentially puts all the parties in the same room, goes over the principles of how to work together better, what issues are coming up, how to resolve them, and they do it all collectively. And I was fortunate to lead those kinds of discussions all over the country. So I learned a lot about how to get people to maybe not reach consensus, but at least get along and recognize that, okay, according to the specs, these are the ways we can handle this situation and be ready to do so when those events would happen on the job. Because uh, in those construction projects, they were generally 2 to 5 years long. So issues would come up at different times during that. And when they do, there's a potential of work stoppage, which could cost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars an hour. So to avoid all of that and angry men and women, right? There's this issue resolution process that we go through to provide solutions and who's going to be responsible for what the timing involved and the distribution of the information in the process in order to get it done. So that reduced in Arizona alone, it reduced litigation from $19 million one year to less than a million the next year. That's how
Works.
much of a difference it made. So if it can do it, if this kind of process can be used for traditionally adversarial environments and it works, and there are now awards made available for excellence in partnering, then why can't we do that elsewhere? And I think it's happening. It's spilling out. It's just
Yeah.
how do we
I
get it, how do we expedite it? Because we need it.
I think we really need to recognize how important it is that we can, that yeah, dealing with our own emotions. I mean, if you're always in your emotion and you can't envisage anything outside your emotion, you are not going to be able to reach many good agreements with other people. That's just not
Sure.
going to happen.
Right. You sit back, arms crossed,
Yeah,
angry, I'm not going to play, right?
yeah, because
Well,
you
that's a sign for
it's
me to
yeah,
start, engaging that person and drawing
absolutely.
them into the conversation and ask him what would benefit him.
Yeah. I used to be a project manager in IT projects, and IT guys
Oh my
are,
God.
yeah, yeah. So IT guys can be very and a lot of them are guys. They care very deeply about what they're producing.
Oh yeah, and they're
And
socially
that's
inept.
yes, yes. They're not always very no. Then they're not always very good at knowing when to not say something. So
Right.
I remember taking one guy to with me who knew a lot of, it had a lot of technical information that I didn't know. I go into a meeting and I say, okay, you're going to sit next to me. If I kick you, shut up. Yeah, and that was the agreement. And I was just going to tap him on the leg, and then the idea was, just don't say anything else, because he recognized that he'd got himself into trouble by saying things sometimes,
Hmm.
and so that was the agreement. If I tap you on the leg,
It's wonderful that you have, and these things are
yeah,
imperative to have a buddy, right? To have someone there with you that can help you adjust on the fly until you can learn to do so on your own.
exactly. And I think it's really what I learned from that. And I did a mediation. I became a mediator around that time as well, because I wanted to learn how to deal with conflicts, because anytime you're trying to create something, you're going to have to work through conflicts to get to
Mhm.
where you want to go. It's just the way it is. Things don't just happen very, very smoothly without any problems at all. Anytime you've got lots of people involved, there are going to be things
Sure.
that can
And
go wrong, and that's
and
fine.
sometimes the bumpier it is, the better
Yeah,
results you get because all of these things mean something to at least one, maybe multiple, and there's resolution that can take place by
absolutely.
engaging the group to collectively look at it. And, many heads are better than one. It
Absolutely.
seems like it may take longer, right? Because it's
Yeah,
this long drawn, it seemingly, this is what the old mentality was of the guys that would sit back, the
yeah,
materialists, right? Not emotional at all. What's all this touchy-feely, warm, fuzzy crap, right? Well, fact is,
I've had a lot of those. Yeah.
right, right. And there still are,
Yeah.
mostly in the upper age brackets, and this still gives that opportunity for those things to come to light and for these types to see, oh, gosh, you mean if I maybe show I care a little bit more, things will change?
The thing that always helped me was, what is this person trying to do? It may be completely, as you say, inept, not clear, but the intention was usually good. Not always, but then you spot that if somebody's only doing something for themselves, then that's a different matter. But a lot
Right.
of the time somebody is actually trying to make sure of something, improve something,
Sure, you
get
have a project goal. You want to
yeah,
reach it the best way that you can, and how that comes out.
yeah, that really how
Very
that comes out, it can be a different thing. But if you can, I found that focusing on, okay, so what's important to this person? What is really important to this person? And it may be quality, it may be, it may be results, it may be whatever it is. And if I can show that I recognize that in that person, you really care about this, don't you? Then you see people, yes, right. Then you get people talking because you've gone a little bit further. You're not talking about the argument on the table. You're seeing what's behind the argument.
right.
And that's
That
what I
seems to be a
it's the,
key. That what you
yeah.
just said, what's behind the argument? Because if you get into the argument, you're in the argument,
Oh yeah.
right? You're participating in that energy. So being able to see that start and then understand, okay, well, so what are the real questions here? What are the needs of the people? And one of the things that an old mentor taught me years ago is that he says, this is a mediator. He was even the president of the American Society for Alternate Dispute Resolution.
Ooh,
Right?
yeah.
Wonderful human being. He says there really is no conflict. There's just miscommunication. That miscommunication happens because the two or more arrive at the table with their own dictionaries from which they speak
Yeah,
and listen from.
absolutely.
And until they understand the dictionary of the other, there's always going to be that miscommunication. So how do you do that? Well, there's skilled processes and particular processes to do that.
Yeah.
That,
And it can change really quickly.
oh,
That's
absolutely.
something so beautiful to see. If somebody suddenly feels listened to when they haven't felt listened to for so long.
Or at least you want to listen to them,
Yeah.
right? Whether you're
And
fully understanding them or
yeah,
not, that's a different
exactly.
story, but you're making the effort.
Yeah. That can just open somebody up and really change the way you communicate.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you can feel it. Now, I personally believe that we are so sensitive to the situation. Everything's energy. We can sense that. It tightens up when things are constricted. It loosens up when people are feeling like they're being heard and cared for in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you or do you think that it's appropriate to begin bringing those discussions in? Because rather than using the esoteric words, the psychological words, the psychiatric words, the nonverbal communication words, all of those kinds of things, we have a direct experience of this, what's going on in our body, how we sense things, how we feel things.
Yeah.
Is that more where you think things might be going in the workaday life and in businesses and companies that are working to come out of this old paradigm and be agile enough to navigate the new one?
Well, I started trying talking in a different way when I was working in IT, which was quite a brave thing to do, being a woman anyway, and having
Sure.
suspicious emotions and things like that. But I noticed that if I talked about sort of like, for example, somebody had done something and I wasn't happy, and I noticed that I started shrinking back from him as a result. And I said that. I told him, look, what you're doing now is making me shrink away from you. Is that what you want? And that shocked him into listening. So I think sometimes just those kind of simple conversations,
Authentic,
nobody wants that to happen.
vulnerable,
Yeah, absolutely.
honest,
Yeah,
transparent responses.
yeah. Yeah, and nobody can tell me that's not what I'm feeling. No, I mean they can
Oh,
try,
they can try. Oh, yeah. And they do
and they
often,
will.
right?
But that's your problem then. You think I don't feel something. Well, okay, but that's not what it is. So we have to be prepared to say some things that people may think are a little bit weird or odd. Um,
And the
but as long as
uncomfort
we,
that's created from that, how do you navigate that? Because in that place, when you can get comfortable in the uncomfort, magic happens, seemingly,
yeah.
right?
Well, I've got an example of that going on because um, one of the things I've been doing while I've been building up this business to do with self-expression and coaching and writing, what have you, I've also been doing some English teaching on the side to bring some income in. And there's one of the guys I've been teaching. I really get on well with him. He's a very down to earth guy, production manager. I don't think there's an esoteric bone in his body, not yet. But we
Right.
had a conversation about my podcast. And he said, "You've got a podcast?" And he was very excited about that. He thought that was great. And he said, "I'm going to go and have a listen." I say, "You may decide I'm nuts when you listen to one of these podcast episodes." And, that's up to him what he does with it. He's known me long enough to know who I am and what I bring to the table. So,
Mhm.
if he doesn't like what I believe in or some of my ideas, that's okay. You know,
Sure.
yeah,
Well, sometimes whether they believe or not, how people behave offers evidence that they actually know that. They just
mm,
don't use the particular words or description, or their experience of it is different. So they do the same thing. And how do we, say, oh, yeah, you're doing this. I see that. And gosh, I do it this way. Isn't that interesting how we both, arrive at this same place differently?
yeah, yeah. It's all down to conversations, isn't it, Zen?
Conversations can solve anything. You just have to be willing to have them.
Yeah. And be willing to show up as yourself.
Right. Right. The authentic, transparent, because you can't hide from yourself. People feel that too. And I could be wrong, but what I believe is happening cosmologically, because we're moving through space, I'm going to go off in the ethers here for a minute, and just in looking at structural things energetically as to how we are affected by subtle energy and shifts in the vibratory realm around us that has been shown to have happened as our solar system traverses the Milky Way. Right? We're in a different area of space. The energy level's subtly different. Well, what's that do? It affects us because we're subtle energy beings. That's the emotion, right? That we get triggered by, that we may or may not understand. So with this activity, there seems to be more willingness to explore this uncomfort, this unknown, and addressing courage, right? Courage is, fear that said its prayers, I've heard, right? That we step into this uncomfort with an open mind, heart, an authentic self that's curious. How can we get along better?
Yeah.
Or how, that's at a relationship level, at a company level. How can we be more efficient? How can we have better results for the community that we serve or that we're located in, on a, political scale? How can we truly nurture a global alliance that works towards taking care of one another rather than fight for territory and resources? It's possible.
Yeah. And to me, that's the big change that we need to make, that to look beyond our own little territories and make connections, make those links across the globe. because there are things that we need to solve and we can only solve them together. We can't
That's
do it as little individual groups. It's not going to work.
And speaking of working, we've worked through our time together. Once again, what I would like as a parting gift from you, what kind of tasty tidbit could you leave for others to explore or integrate into their lives that might help their daily level of happiness?
I think I would encourage everybody just to take a little bit of time each day to pause and observe and listen and feel and sense. So not just with ears and eyes, but also we've got more senses. Just take a little bit of time each day to observe and check in with yourself. How are you doing? So you can be kind to yourself. If you're not kind to yourself, you can't be kind to others.
Perfect. What a wonderful gift. And thanks so much for being with us today, Lynn.
You're so welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. And namaste and in la catch. And thank you for sticking with us for this episode of One World in a New World. I'm Zen Benefiel, your host. And for Lynn Coleman and myself, we'll see you again soon. Thanks for being with us.